Hi everyone. In this video we're going to take a look at a simple and effective way to take notes in any subject, the Cornell Notes method. We'll start by going through the layout of a Cornell Notes page before seeing how the structure helps us learn new content. Cornell Notes are great because of their simplicity and flexibility. We can use them in class when we're learning something new, or we can use them when taking notes on our own. Here's the layout of a page. To save time and effort, we might want to come to class with a bunch of sheets that already have the layout. Check the link in the video description for a template that you can print off and use for yourself. There are also a couple of examples of how Cornell Notes might look in some different types of subjects. At the top of the page we can fill in some details like the subject, the specific topic that these notes are on, and the lesson objective or dot point that we're covering. Don't worry, this isn't a physics lesson in disguise, we're just using an example to see how things work. Try and break down a larger topic into smaller topics so that we'll only need 1 or 2 pages to cover the topic at hand. In this case, we are not trying to cover the entire physics of waves in just 1 or 2 pages. We can add a date in the top right corner so we can keep track of when we took the notes. This is where we should be at before we actually jump into learning the content. As we hear, read, or watch the information that we're learning, we just take notes in the right-hand column. For example, our teacher might start the lesson by saying that the crest of a transverse wave is the highest point on the wave. It's also called the peak. We hear this and just jot down a note that captures the information. All this seems pretty similar to regular note-taking, but here's the important part. We now want a cue on the left that relates to the information that we've just written down. A cue can just be a question, keyword, or phrase that refers to the material on the right-hand side. So in this case, a simple cue for the first point might be, what is the crest or peak? In some cases, the lesson might move on before we have time to write cues, and that's fine. We can just come back later and write the cues when there's a pause in the lesson. What we have at the end is 2 columns, cues on the left and responses on the right. The cues on the left prompt us to think of the more detailed information next to it, which can be notes, diagrams, quotations, or whatever is relevant to the topic we're learning. At the bottom of the page is space for a summary. Sometimes a topic might take more than 1 page worth of cues and responses to cover, so just do your summary on the last page of the bunch. This is the space to condense the information and try to relate it to other areas of the course. Try and wait at least a couple of hours before doing the summary. That will give the content time to sink in and let your brain sort things out in the background. So that's the basic structure, but why should we bother? Firstly, Cornell Notes help us to break things down into more manageable chunks of information. We've all had the experience of writing a bullet point, then writing a subpoint, and another subpoint, and another subpoint, or otherwise notes that are just a series of big chunky paragraphs. We're likely to lose track of how the information relates, and the content at the bottom might be quite different to where we started. These notes are also a bit hard to read and find specific pieces of information in easily. Well, Cornell Notes help make sure that each cue and response is a clearly defined chunk of information. This means that we can keep track of the important bits of information easily. It also forces us to think of a topic as a set of smaller chunks, which are way easier to remember than a beefy paragraph or lots of nested dot points. Another reason why Cornell Notes are great is that they force us to phrase material in a cue and response format. This is good for 3 main reasons. Firstly, cue and response is a good way for our brain to remember things. It's like how looking at a photo you took on holiday can help you to remember the whole day, even though the information is not presented in the photo. The photo is the cue, which reminds us to think of all the information related to it. Secondly, cue and response is essentially how we see material in an assessment. A physics exam doesn't normally start with the question, write down everything you've learnt about transverse waves. We get questions testing a smaller chunk of the information, such as what is the name of the highest point on a transverse wave? This is the kind of chunk that we're already going to have clearly laid out in our Cornell Notes. Finally, the cue and response structure is great for revising and testing yourself on the material. All we need to do is cover up the right-hand column so that we can't see it, and test our ability to respond to the cues on the left. You can see where you're strong, where you're weak, and testing yourself will strengthen your memories much more than just rereading or highlighting notes. Cool, let's do our summary of this lesson and why not in Q and response format? What is the basic structure of Cornell Notes? Q's go in the column on the left, responses in a column on the right, and a summary in a box at the bottom. What goes in the response column? Responses are the main pieces of content that we need to know. And what goes in the Q column? Qs are questions or keywords and phrases that act as cues to important information. When should we do the summary? We should try and do the summary at the end of a topic and after some time away from the content. We can often come back and have a better understanding of the material just by taking a few hours away from it. Why is it helpful to chunk information? It's easier to understand and remember things if they're broken down into smaller chunks. How do Cornell Notes help us revise at a later time? It's easy to test our knowledge on the key bits of information. Cool. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you soon.